Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hersadulu. I am joined with Eli today. We are going over the Pittsburgh Steelers draft needs going into this 2021 draft coming up in just a few weeks. So we're going to jump right into the thick of things. And first things first, we are going to kind of just break down the losses that they've experienced through this offseason. They have a very long list of players, so we're just going to kind of run through it and break it down. So Eli, first things first, people that are gone from the team. Tackle Alejandro Villanueva. Center Maurkice Pouncey has retired. On top of that, they also lost right tackle Matt Feeler. The cornerback position was stripped of Steven Nelson and Mike Hilton. They lost linebackers Bud Dupree and Avery Williamson. Also adding to that list is Vince Williams as well. And then for the final guy, running back James Conner. So a ton of losses. The people that they've brought in have not really made up for the losses. Guard Rashad Coward from the Bears has been brought in. Running back Kalen Ballage, Miles Killebrew, and then also center B.J. Finney. Obviously, B.J. Finney, not someone you can compare up to the loss of Maurkice Pouncey. Killebrew, kind of just like a plug-and-play rotational guy. Just your thoughts on kind of, the heavy side of losses as opposed to the net gain that they've had so far with free agency behind us as we move into the draft.
Yeah, obviously, Pittsburgh, one of their biggest strengths that they've had the past few years is how deep they've been as a team. They've had a deep receiving core, deep linebacker core, which helps you do a lot of things, but makes you a little more aggressive when you have guys coming off the bench who can just give everyone a breather. So losing a lot of depth. They're still a very talented team. This is still a playoff caliber team, but obviously without that depth, injuries start piling up as they do in a season. They could be in a lot of trouble early off. So the draft's going to be super important. See who they bring in, which pieces they want to replace, and which needs they prioritize.
Mm-hmm. I know. I definitely agree with you. So now, going into the team needs, as we kind of take a look at the draft here and seeing what they can possibly do, there's a lot of options for them, especially in the first round. You could really pick out a bunch of different names out of a hat, and they would be a good fit for them. The positions of need that I have pulled out specifically for them are the offensive line, cornerback, linebacking / edge rushing, depending on how they decide to, go after that. And then running back as well. Obviously, James Conner's gone now. He's not a part of the team. They don't have a true number one. Benny Snell's just kind of a change of pace guy. So I don't think you could really put your draft stock in him. So first things first, we'll just address the offensive line issue. So Pouncey's gone. He's retired. Matt Feeler, he's gone. They brought in, who was it there? Guard Rashad Coward to kind of help fill some of those holes that were lost, per se. And then on top of that, Villanueva, he's kind of been rumored to potentially be coming back to Pittsburgh. It sounds like Pittsburgh told him to hold off on selling his house. My question to you is, do you think that it would be good for them to pull him in, or should they maybe move on and find somebody else?
Yeah, absolutely. Villanueva is one of the more respected guys around the league, obviously being a former Army Ranger. He's incredibly well respected. He's incredibly disciplined, and he's very well liked in that locker room. So even just bringing him back as a locker room presence, I don't know whether their plan is to have him be the starter next year or maybe just as a more depth piece while they bring in a younger guy to help him out. But we could also see him kick in from tackle to guard. Maybe change of position would help kickstart his career again. But he's a really well respected guy. Even just his locker room presence, bringing him back would be a super important piece for them.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. I think Villanueva, just keeping some sort of continuity on that offensive line as much as possible would be good for them, especially if they're going to be changing up in the running back position too. You want to have as much fluidity as possible with an offensive line going into such an important season where you have Ben Roethlisberger like potentially 1 year out at this point, probably more than last year, 1 year out from retirement. So with the running back conversation kind of in play with the offensive line, James Conner, do you think that they're going to be bringing him back? Do you think they should just look to move on? What are you kind of looking at for them?
Yeah, I think James Conner, I think it's best for both teams to just kind of part ways. I think James Conner could be a really good back. I think a great place for him would be maybe like a Carolina behind a guy like Christian McCaffrey, where he's not counted on to be that number one guy. Or maybe like in New Orleans playing behind Alvin Kamara. Some place where he's not going to be counted on as being the number one guy, being the lead running back. Could kickstart his career, even if it's just a 1 year deal. We could see him have a good year next year, then get a bigger deal after that. But I think for Pittsburgh, you have a lot of guys who you kind of want to flush out, see what you got there. Maybe maybe Benny Snell in a bigger role. Maybe he could be a really good player. Maybe an Anthony McFarland is somebody you want to see. Maybe Kalen Ballage could be. Maybe this is finally the situation where Kalen Ballage breaks out, or even a Jalen Samuels too. So you have 4 talented running backs. It's not that you're lacking talent. You're just lacking that go-to kind of guy. So I think I have running back as probably the number 3 need for Pittsburgh right now. We think of Pittsburgh teams as having that guy they just hand the ball off to and say, hey, go get us some yards, go churn out some yards, especially with Ben Roethlisberger getting up there in age with his last season. While he is still capable of slinging the ball around the field, you don't really want him to at this stage in his career. Like, obviously, he put up 500 yards in obscene video game numbers in the playoff game, but they still ended up getting hammered by Cleveland. Yeah. So not being able to control the ball is going to be much more of a problem at this stage of Ben Roethlisberger's career. So I think it's best for them to go a different way, probably in the draft for running back.
I could definitely agree with you on that one. I think that, at this point, we've kind of come to the decision that James Conner might not be the number 1 they thought he was when they let Le'Veon Bell walk a few years ago. He shined a lot early on, but then it just feels like year by year his production has just slowed. And it got to the point where Benny Snell was, fighting for position at the number 1 role. So I definitely think I'm with you on that one. I think them just kind of, parting ways, putting James Conner in a position where maybe he's not relied upon so much and he's more in a rotational role where, like, kind of how he was the number 2 to Le'Veon Bell's number 1. I think he would be a great change of pace number 2 guy for somebody else that's, whether that's, the Jets or not the Jets, I'm sorry, the Giants. I'm thinking New York teams, the Giants with like Saquon Barkley or like Ezekiel Elliott, put him behind somebody who's established, who's a legit number 1 guy that is just in there to churn out those extra few yards whenever they need a breather. So let's kind of focus in on the actual draft itself and break down. We'll go through the first 3 picks here. We're not going to go too deep into the draft, but for the first round, like I said, it's kind of like a who's who with them. It really matters based off of what they decide to do with the remaining time of offseason that we have heading into the draft. The rumors that, Villanueva might actually be back with Pittsburgh next year after everyone kind of initially thinking, he was gone. His run blocking kind of, it regressed a little bit going into this past season. So here's how I kind of shake it out. If they don't bring in Villanueva, at this point, you're going to have to focus on the offensive line. Whether you go tackle or guard, I think tackle is probably the way you go because there's a lot of really highly rated tackles in this draft. I have at 24, right tackle from Oklahoma State, Tevin Jenkins, 0 sacks in his last 2 seasons played. That is production. That is protecting the quarterback. And you mentioned how Ben Roethlisberger's getting up there in age and, you don't want to necessarily be throwing all of it onto him to have him throwing the football 60 times in a game. It's very obvious the Steelers are not afraid to do that. So you want somebody with a track record that can keep the quarterback upright, whether he's playing the blind side or opposite of the blind slide, whether they actually keep him at right tackle or kick him out to the left, whatever they decide to do there. And then from there, this is like my second team need. Cornerback, I have either Caleb Farley or Asante Samuel Jr., Farley being from Virginia Tech, Asante Samuel from Florida State. I would maybe value Asante a little bit more just because Farley didn't play this past season. So if that's really coming into play with teams deciding who they're going to go after and who they're not going to go after, I would give the edge to Asante. That's if they're able to fall far enough. There are a lot of teams that need cornerbacks. I think that the Steelers are just high enough that maybe they'd be able to pick up one of these 2 guys. I could be totally wrong on that. And then from there, I don't really have them chasing edge in the first round, but linebacker, Tulsa's Zaven Collins, I think he could fall far enough because, the draft is essentially starting at that number 4 spot. We have a pretty good idea that it's going to be quarterback at least 1 through 3, and it might even be 1 through 4 after, the next couple of weeks go by and trades shake things up some more. But I think Zaven Collins is definitely a strong possibility. I think there's a lot of defensive talent that's going to be available in that like mid to late first round that wouldn't otherwise be there if this draft didn't feel so like quarterback hungry per se. And then the highlight pick, the one that I think a lot of people would want to see. And I also think that if they get their ducks in a row, if they figure something out at cornerback, whether they bring in somebody else or if they're just happy with who they have in Justin Lane and Joe Hayden there and if they decide to target later in the draft and they don't go linebacker because one of their guys isn't there, Najee Harris is probably the way you have to go. It's gonna either be Harris or Etienne. I don't know who it's gonna end up being, but I'm a big fan of Najee Harris. I think he's that bulldozing type of back that you'd want in Pittsburgh. I could just see him in the black and gold, and that's kind of how I look at the first round for the Steelers. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so the way I see it, the first round kind of comes down to 5 players for Pittsburgh. The way the draft's going, the way it kind of shook out, between 10 and 20 is honestly the biggest need for cornerbacks. And we could see a team like Cleveland, who's probably has the biggest need for cornerback, trade up into that range to grab one of them. So I don't think any of the top corners are going to be available to them. So you're probably going to lose out on Surtain, Farley, and a guy like Surtain, Farley, and J.C. Horn. Wow, that was bad. But you're probably going to lose out on them. But there's still a lot of good players that's going to be available. And like you said, there's going to be a lot of defensive players. I think we're going to see the defensive linemen really drop. There isn't really that dominant pass rusher in this draft that we normally see, like your Nick Bosa types.
Yeah.
There's nobody that's going to be pushing for the top 10 in this draft. So I think we could see guys like that fall. For example, a guy like Kwity Paye out of Michigan, I think he could be a good selection for them. Brings in another pass rusher, very solid 4 years he spent at Michigan in a pro system under Jim Harbaugh. So that's a guy we could see maybe turn some heads in Pittsburgh, maybe comes in, plays on that defensive line. I think if Najee Harris is available to them at their selection, I think that's just, you kind of have to just write it in and take him. Like I said, with Ben Roethlisberger getting up there in age, having that bell cow back, you can just hand it to and say, go churn out some yards, make my life easier.
Yeah.
The only 2 teams I could possibly see taking him are Miami at 18, and then potentially the Jets at 23. Because other than that, there aren't a whole lot of running back needy teams. Chicago, maybe, but I think Chicago is going to be in the trade up market. Arizona at 16, maybe. They don't really have that dominant back either, but I think 16 is a little bit too high for these backs in this draft. So I think Arizona will probably go somewhere on the defense, or maybe they go for an offensive lineman. But at 24, I think Pittsburgh is pretty safe. Good spot for them to go ahead and take that running back. I think it'll be a good selection for them. Mm-hmm. So that's a great opportunity as well. And if they don't take one, they're going to be gone at 25. I think Jacksonville could go ahead and take one of the running backs. They could go ahead and take one of the receivers. Jacksonville's got a lot of options, being such a young team. But I think that'll be a great guy. So that's 2 of the 5 guys. So I think another great guy we could see for them is a Christian Darrisaw. Super, super talented, super high ceiling, all over the place with his production, all over the place with his technique. So I see teams, some teams could see him pushing top 10. Other teams have him rated in the second round. So I think 24 is a more safe option for him. You don't need to play him right away day one. You could have him sit behind the offensive lineman they just brought in. Obviously, if you bring back Villanueva too, that could be another guy he could learn from. But super high talent guy as well. That's another great option for them as well. Other than that, it's kind of open who they want to pick. If those 3 guys aren't available to, for whatever reason, there are a couple more interesting guys. There's the linebacker of Notre Dame, Jeremiah Owusu Karamoa. Super, super talented, really productive, solid 4 years. Obviously, Notre Dame has been a playoff team as of recent, so I think that'd be a really good home for him in Pittsburgh. Just a great opportunity for him to learn from one of the greatest teams in terms of having linebackers on their team. And then the last guy I want to mention is a guy, Elijah Vera Tucker, offensive lineman, interior, is going to play in one of those guard positions out of USC. Really productive 3 years he spent there. Really high ceiling as well. He could be one of the more elite guards. Obviously, with David DeCastro's situation, not as young as he once was. So maybe bringing another interior offensive lineman will help push him, maybe extend his career a little bit, having that guy there pushing him. If not, they could just kick him to the other guard position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there really is just like a who's who of, who are you going to go after? in that first round for Pittsburgh. They have, I don't want to say a lot of team needs, but they have a lot of positions where you could realistically go after in the draft. It's not like dire needs, like when you look at a team like Jacksonville that has so many holes they have to fill. But they just have a lot of places where they have really solid players, but they need like a legitimate number one guy in the second round. So a few later picks. Do you have anyone specific that you think that is worth them targeting in a little bit of a later round?
Yeah. So in the second round, there's some talent. It's a very deep running back class. So I think in the second round, you could see them grab a running back. I think the North Carolina boys, Javonte Williams and Michael Carter, either of them could be really good options as well. I'm a little bit higher on Williams than Carter. He's a little bit bigger, a little sturdier, a little bit stronger of a runner. Mm-hmm. I think he could be a really solid running back for them to bring in. But if you don't want to go running back, there's a bunch of offensive linemen that should be available around them. Guy I really want to mention, out of Oklahoma, guy Creed Humphrey, their center, not really the sexy offensive lineman because athletically he's very limited, but was as solid as could be. Played against, obviously, in Oklahoma, they're playing with stud quarterbacks. You had multiple Heisman Trophy winners. You got Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. He played with 2 first overall picks, so he's used to playing with these solid quarterbacks, and he's just been solid. Obviously, the Big 12 is what I like to call the Madden Conference. Nobody plays any defense. The scores are insane. So you always have to take offensive linemen coming from out of the Big 12 with a grain of salt. They're not really playing against these dominant pass rushers that you would see as a guy coming out of the SEC would. But that's another great option from as well. I really like Creed Humphrey as well. Then from there, there's a couple cornerbacks I think they could go after as well. A guy like Tyson Campbell, some teams are very high on him. I could see him go very high in the second round. But
I have him for there in the second round as well.
Yeah, great guy. Tall guy, 6'2", 185. Really good ball skills, really solid tackler, which is incredibly important if you want to play in Pittsburgh.
6 misses
I
out
think
of
he
99.
could be a great option for them as well. After that, and yeah, then a guy like Asante Samuel, I'm going to be interested to see where he goes. I could see him going towards the end of the first round. I could also see him slipping a little bit, maybe going towards the end of the second round. Didn't really have as many productive years as he wanted. Didn't really play till later on in his career. So I think he's a really talented kid, but be interested to see where he goes. He's also a little bit on the smaller side, only about 5'10", 180. So be interested to see where he goes. So that's another great option for them as well.
Yeah, so I'm kind of looking at the same thing, offensive line, cornerback position. Like you'd mentioned, Tyson Campbell, I think, would be a really good guy for them to go after in the draft. You know, solid tackler, with the defense that they play, which is real zone-heavy blitz schemes. I think that being able to tackle while still managing your zone really well is utmost of importance for the Steelers, and they've got to have – the fact that we're both able to pull out that name, you know, they've got to be looking at him as well. They have to be aware of the tackling ability he has, especially as a zone player. I also have there for offensive line Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame, another guy who has had 0 sacks in the last 2 seasons. And like I mentioned before, if you know the Steelers need to get the memo that Ben Roethlisberger is not going to be around much longer, but they still have him throwing the football 60 times in a game. So if that's going to be what's going on, you want somebody that's going to keep him upright, and you got to go for people to have a track record of not allowing any sacks. I really think either one of those tackles, if they ended up with Tevin Jenkins in the first round, if that's the route they decide to go, or if they go Liam Eichenberg in the second round, I think you're getting 2 very solid guys at the tackle position you could plug in there and have starters day one. As for the third round, kind of like the money pick where, you know, you're not investing too much into them, but, you know, it's, you know, they can sometimes turn into a very legitimate starter in the league. I have edge rusher from Pittsburgh, Rashad Weaver, 17 sacks in 2 seasons. That is a lot of sacks for somebody who's projected in that mid-third round zone. He's a Pittsburgh guy. Obviously, he's from not from Pittsburgh, but he's been playing in Pittsburgh the last 3 years rather. It would be great for him to be able to just stick around in Pittsburgh even longer. What are you thinking about them for the third round? Because I really like the edge rushing pick for them here. That is something they need to do. They need to pair somebody up with TJ Watt, and I think going edge in the third round, if Rashad Weaver's there, that's almost like a no-brainer for them.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a solid pick. But the way this draft's shaking, there's going to be a lot of offensive linemen available in the third round. 2 names I have circled is Landon Dickerson out of Alabama. Super productive kid, super high Super great locker room guy. Obviously, at Alabama, coming from a winning program that just has NFL players written all over it. But coming off an injury last year, he missed the end of last year, but all the signs point to him being very healthy. It was funny. In Mac Jones's interview after his pro day, Landon Dickerson actually did a cartwheel through the interview. It was really funny to watch. But
athleticism at the offensive line positions, never a bad thing.
Exactly. Exactly. Landon Dickerson could be a really good pick for him. That could be their center for the next 10 years if they look at his medicals and see that they like where he's at. That could be a guy who starts a center for him for the next 10 years. He's that solid of a player. Would probably be a lot higher in this draft if it wasn't for the injury. Then another name I've circled who has about a second or third round grade on him is Dylan Radins out of North Dakota State. Humongous dude, about 6'6", a little slight for his height. He's under 300 right now. Obviously, in the NFL, it'll probably be very easy for him to put on some weight being in that NFL culture, but that'd be another great guy. A little bit raw, but coming out of North Dakota State, they have an excellent program there, obviously, with guys like Carson Wentz and Trey Lance, and the way they've just been able to dominate at the FCS level. They're considered the Alabama of the FCS, so that's just another great program that he's coming out of. So that'd be a great option for them to go as well. Then from there, they kind of have their pick of what they want to do. I think linebacker could be another possible direction they could go. I want to give a shout out to my guy. His name is Chaz Surratt out of North Carolina, 4-year player. Really great story. His freshman year at North Carolina, he was actually their starting quarterback. He started 7 games for them. Then his junior year, obviously Sam Howell came in, a guy who could be a very high pick in either the next draft or 2 years from now, depending on when he wants to come out. But a guy like Chaz Surratt switched to linebacker. His junior year was a starting linebacker, finished second in ACC Defensive Player of the Year, first year ever playing linebacker. Just an incredible story. Was incredibly productive, played 2 years at linebacker, incredibly productive, team captain, checks off all the boxes you want, could be a really good glue guy for them, play a lot of different positions, really great athlete. Obviously, he still has a lot to learn with switching to linebacker so late in his life, but I think Pittsburgh could be a great situation for him. He needs to put on some weight, but he's a good 6'2", so he's not a small guy, so I think that could be a great option for them as well. Then from there, cornerback gets a little thin after the first 2 rounds. There are a couple of interesting names I want to talk about. There's Shakur Brown out of Michigan State. Obviously, Michigan State did not have the greatest year last year. Very disappointed, but Shakur Brown flashed some potential. He showed some good press coverage skills. He gave up a few more big plays than you'd like to see, but not a guy that they'd be looking to come in and start right away, but has some potential to be a really good player down the line. And then a guy who has Pittsburgh written all over him, a local kid. He's actually from Grafton, Massachusetts. I got to watch him play in high school. He played against my high school, so that was really cool. But Ifeatu Melifanu out of Syracuse. Uber athletic, physically can do a lot of different things. Really big kid at 6'3", 213, a little bit bigger than you typically think of with your cornerbacks. But I think he has a lot of different positions he can play around the field. Mm-hmm. I think he could be kicked out to safety, where he could be a guy that plays some safety minutes. You could play him in the slot. We see a guy like Deon Buchanan, who ended up switching from safety to linebacker. So that could be possibly in the card for him. He just got to bulk up a little bit. He's got the
6'3", 213?
6'3", 213.
That's like an Aqib Talib type cornerback.
Yeah.
Be real physical.
Big, strong kid.
Big, strong guy playing corner. I like that. I was a big fan of Aqib Talib. So corners like that, big, physical, I'm a big fan of that kind of play.
Yeah, so a lot of different options they could go
sounds
in the
like
third
a
round.
Steelers. I don't mean to cut you off again. That sounds like a Steelers guy, though. That sounds like
absolutely.
a Steelers
A
guy.
guy with that kind of versatility who can play all over the defense would be – we see a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick who went from a good player to one of the best safeties in the league, playing all over that defense, just basically he's a football player at this point. He's
you can't really identify his position. He's a football player. Yeah. No, so the Steelers have a lot of needs. It's just they're not like pressing needs. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a really interesting team going into this draft because they were a team that was, they made it to the playoffs and then ultimately got pounded by Cleveland that first week. And then they've lost so many big positions going into this offseason because of cap struggles and retirements, whatever the issues may be. And also just from poor production too, like someone like James Conner, he's probably not there because of just production. they have a lot that they need to look at. So this is the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about regarding the Steelers, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts on this are. And I actually have the draft big board from PFF pulled up for this one here because I'm kind of curious to peek through and see who you think. And this is who I think would be a solid guy for them to go after. Roethlisberger is probably around for one more year. Maybe if somehow they convince him to, or not convince him, because it sounds more like he wanted to be back than they wanted him back. If somehow, I would be shocked. But, I'm going with the idea that this is Ben's last season. Do you think that they should target a quarterback, maybe in the later rounds, that would be worth looking at? And who? And before you answer, the person I'm looking at that I really like is quarterback Davis Mills from Stanford. Pro system, which is kind of what you want when you're getting a quarterback later in the round, somebody who's at least played in a pro style of offense, so the transition isn't as great for them. He didn't have the number. I don't want to say he didn't have the numbers, but he wasn't quite the flashy guy. Going into his numbers from last year, he had, 1,500 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. The year prior, he had about 1,900 yards, 11 touchdowns, 5 picks. So, overall, this is just he's a solid quarterback that I think has all the physical traits that a quarterback from Pittsburgh would be like. He's 6'5", 200, I think it's 230, I want to say, 225. So just under 225, just under 230. I think that this is a good project type guy for them to go after. And I'm curious to think if you think they should go after a quarterback.
I think if an opportunity presents itself later on, like a Davis Mills is a guy I could see slipping, especially with all the quarterbacks going so high in the first. And there aren't a lot of teams that need that project type of quarterback. So a guy like Davis Mills and a guy like Kyle Trask out of Florida, those are both very similar type of guys coming from big time schools in Stanford and Florida that obviously have a lot of pro players coming from them. But those type of guys, if they slip to like a 4th or a 5th round, I could see Pittsburgh pulling the trigger. But the way this Pittsburgh roster shakes out right now, they just have so many different holes and needs that need more urgent filling than quarterback. They still do have a guy in Dwayne Haskins on the roster who could be another project quarterback. Question is, do you really want to have 2 project type of quarterbacks on your roster? Obviously, you could put one on the practice squad, but still, having 2 of those guys, iffy at best. You don't have a great back. Mason Rudolph, in his limited action in the league, hasn't played particularly great. So your quarterback situation for Aaron Roethlisberger is shaky to begin with. So bringing in another quarterback may not necessarily make anything clearer for you. So I'm not really in love with the idea of them picking a quarterback, but I still think there are some later guys who could slip, and then it would be a much better idea.
Fair enough. I was just curious your thoughts on that because I've seen a lot of conversation about the quarterback position and how this is Roethlisberger's last year. And, are people sold on the idea of, Mike Tomlin being able to restructure the direction that Dwayne Haskins' career's trajectory seems to be in right now. So I'm curious to see how that folds out. But I do like Davis Mills, like a late, 4th, 5th, 6th round guy. If he falls to them, if you've hit all the team positional needs that you think you needed to go after, if he's sitting there in the late rounds, not a bad person. Kyle Trask I was operating off the idea that he might already be gone. I feel like Trask is going to go somewhere in like the 2nd to 4th round range. And I would expect if Pittsburgh's going to go after a QB, it would be like 4th to 6th, maybe. I don't think you'd take a 7. There's no point at that. But somewhere in that 4 to 6 round, because, we all know Tom Brady was in the 6th. So you can never say never, but I haven't seen a 7th round quarterback produce yet. But that's pretty much it for the Pittsburgh Steelers conversation. I am, again, Ethan Hrisadulu. To my left, which is your right, is Eli Bieberman. We'll be back again bringing you more draft predictions and just kind of breakdowns on what teams need as we kind of roll our way through the rest of this slow point in the offseason. So be sure to comment, share, subscribe to the channel, or you can find us on social media. We have an Instagram. There's a Twitter account. There's also the Facebook page. So you can find us everywhere. You can also listen to us on all the podcasting and radio platforms. What do we have? Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You can literally find anywhere you listen to people speak. You can also find the show. But that is it for today. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you all for listening.